Okay, so if you're in Galatians chapter 4, this is something I just wanted to reference real quick. This will get us started. Hopefully it will get you thinking. Hopefully, if you're a thinking person, a lot of this stuff has at least crossed your mind. And so I'm hoping to answer a lot of questions tonight. So Galatians chapter 4, just look in verse 4. I referenced this chapter and this verse the very first night that we were here, but we didn't read it. And so this is Paul speaking to the churches in Galatia. Paul loved the churches in Galatia. He went through the churches in Galatia on all of his mission trips. And so Galatia is a region. Galatia is not a city. And so the churches in Galatia are Iconium, Lystra, Derbe, and Pisidian Antioch. And so this is a general letter written to all those churches. And so this is Paul speaking to them. Verse 4. But when the time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under law, to redeem those under law, that we might receive the full rights of sons. Okay? And so that's all we're going to look at right there. Hopefully, if you're a thinking person, you've recognized it says, when the time had fully come. Okay? So there was a time that the Lord had preordained, and you can imagine for thousands of years, he's sitting there and he's watching this clock, and he's saying, I'm just going to wait. The time's not right yet. The time's not right yet. Okay? Because if you think about it, Paradise Lost from the garden happens, and why didn't God send Jesus just then? Right? It still would have brought salvation. For some reason he waited, and then even after our Old Testament is finished, if you remember on that chart, there's about 400 years of silence where he waits, right? And so he waited till the time was fully come. And so tonight we're hopefully going to answer that question: why? What made this time just right between the testaments? Okay, so if you're in Daniel chapter 2, I want us to look at something. And it's pretty neat because Daniel, if you'll remember, he was one of the exiles for the first Babylonian exile in like 605 BC. Okay, and so Daniel, the story of this is that, let's see, chapter 2. If you'll remember this story, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and it really disrupts him. And so he says, hey, I need someone to interpret this dream. And he says, not only do I need someone to interpret this dream, but I need someone to tell me the dream also. And so what Daniel did was Daniel came and told him his dream. And so look in verse 31. And this is pretty neat because remember the context. This is Daniel speaking to Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, right? And he's going to tell him what his dream is about. His dream is apocalyptic, meaning that it's looking towards the future, and apocalyptic imagery is that it uses an image to convey the meaning. Okay? And so, verse 31 of chapter 2. This is Daniel speaking. You looked, O king, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. And he's going to describe 4 parts of this statue. He says the head of the statue is made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and feet partly of iron and partly baked of clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Skip down to verse 36. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to you, O king. Okay, so you go look up here. Just look at the left side of this picture. This is the statue that Daniel just described to Nebuchadnezzar. And so he says, here's your dream, and then he says, here's the interpretation. This is the dream. Okay, 37, verse 37. You, O king, are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed mankind and the beasts of the field and the beasts of the air. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. Okay, so this statue, he's looking and he says the top of this statue, it's going to represent these different empires. The first one, he's looking at Nebuchadnezzar, and can you get that door? Thank you. And he says, the head of that statue is you. And so he's saying that head represents the empire of Babylon. Okay, now that's not a real big message to Nebuchadnezzar because that was something that was already happening. Okay, what he goes on to explain, this is when it goes into the future. Look, he says, after you, another kingdom will rise inferior to yours. And so he's describing, after that is going to be this next empire that's going to be known as the Persian Empire. Okay, we studied that a little bit last week. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. That kingdom will be the kingdom of the Greece kingdom. And finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Okay, and so this is Daniel describing the intertestamental period. Okay, and so that last empire is going to be the Roman Empire. Okay, and so what Daniel is describing here is the transition, the empires that will take us from the Old Testament to the New Testament. I'll put this back up in just a second. Okay, some of y'all are trying to jot this down. Okay, so in our Old Testament, remember Daniel, as he's talking, he's in this area here. Okay, the Old Testament paradise is lost for Adam. Man is separated from God. And the Old Testament, everything in it points forward to the coming Messiah. The New Testament finally gets us to where the paradise is regained through the second Adam. Man is restored to God and show the Messiah's life. Here are some of the practical differences you'll see in the Old and New. The Old Testament is centered around the temple. At this time, the guys that are in charge, it's usually been prophets, priests, or kings. Old Testaments are in Hebrew. In the Old Testament, there's no major Jewish parties. You're just Jewish. And you remember the last thing we said last week was when the Old Testament closed, the world was kind of shattered. All these nations were separate, right? There's this government here, there's one here, there's one here. Everyone spoke different languages. There's no common culture. There's no common currency. And so then in the New Testament, we get the temple is overshadowed mostly by synagogues. You see these guys, rabbis that come out of nowhere, right? The New Testament is written in Greek. In the New Testament, we have these Jewish parties. You can't read through the New Testament and say, I've never heard of these guys. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, right? They're everywhere. Where did they come from? And then there's these other parties known as the Essenes and the Zealots. And in the New Testament, the world as we know it, or as it's known at that time, has been united. Okay, there's a common language, there's a common culture, there's common currency, there's a common government. Okay, and so the thing that takes us from the old to the new is what Daniel is describing here. Okay, so flip forward over to Daniel chapter 7. I think this is an even cooler image of these four empires that happen in between. And then we'll take some time to describe each one of them. And it's pretty interesting. So Daniel chapter 7. Go to just verse 1. So this is a different time. It says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind. As he was lying on his bed, he wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven churning up from the sea. Four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. He's going to describe these four beasts, and I've already put the chart together for you here so you can tell that it's the same thing that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of earlier. The first was like a lion, and it had wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a man, and the heart of a man was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. Okay? And remember, when you're reading apocryphal literature in the Old Testament, remember, this is an image, okay? So it's not a lion with wings. He's saying it looked like a lion with wings. He's using the words that he knows. And we don't know what it was, okay? So these images do the best they can, right? Which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. An interesting thing about this is it says it was raised up on one of its sides, okay? Have you ever seen guys that, well, it's probably a stupid example, but guys that arm wrestle, or if someone works out one side of their muscle groups a ton more than the other, have you ever seen that? Where whatever muscle group you work out, it tightens up on that side. And so for the guys that only work out their chest and biceps, that's why they walk like this. I'm not kidding. Have you ever seen these guys? Yeah, okay? Because if you don't work out your back, what happens is that the muscle group tightens up. And so it's describing this bear that one side of it is raised up. One side of it is stronger than the other one. And we'll see why here in a second. And then it had 3 ribs in its mouth, okay? So if an animal has a rib in its mouth, clearly it has just devoured something, right? I'm not going too far with this. I mean, this is just kind of real obvious information. Verse 6, after that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule, okay? So you've got a leopard, which leopards are known for their speed, okay, and their ability to kill. And this leopard, if it wasn't fast enough, it's been given wings. Okay, and if it's not fast enough then, it wasn't given 2 wings, it's given what? 4 wings. Okay, so this is probably an image of something that is lightning fast, right? And then it says that it had 4 heads and was given authority to rule. Well, that's a little strange, but we'll get to that here in a second. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. Okay, and so he gets to this beast, and remember, it's not that this was a lion, a bear, and a leopard. It looked like a lion, a bear, a leopard. And he gets to this beast, and he says, I don't even have words to describe this one. Okay, he says it was just terrifying. We know it had 10 horns. The artist took some freedom here. He looks a lot like Satan here. I don't know. We don't know what the beast looked like. We just know that the significance was that it crushed everything in its path, right? And it had 10 horns on it, and the 10th horn rose up. Well, here, let's just read it. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little horn which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. Okay, and so what we're going to look at tonight are these 4 empires, and it's pretty neat because both of these dreams chronicle exactly what happened in order: the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and the Roman Empire. And keep in mind the images of these 4 beasts, because it's significant, even the specific images that he sees there. Okay, so we'll start here. Now, everything that happens tonight, a lot of it can be found in your Bibles, the beginning part, but the in-between parts, they're not going to be in there because it's intertestamental, okay? And so we get a lot of this information just comes from extra-biblical historical accounts. So unfortunately, I'm going to rely a lot on the slides tonight, okay? Normally I don't do a lot of slides, but this is just a way for us to kind of keep up and stuff like that. Okay, so that first beast, the one that looked like the lion, remember, that was the Babylonian period. And that's even what Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar. He said, you're the first beast, okay? And at this point, we already know this. This is a review. The Babylonians were responsible for the exile, and it was actually 3 exiles of the Jews out of Israel into Mesopotamia. And those exiles were 605 and 597, 586. If you're trying to get the big picture here, don't worry about dates, okay? Some of you guys are super nerds and you want the dates, and so I put them on there. You don't need to memorize the dates, okay? It's just important, not as much that you know what happened as you understand at least why some of these things happened, okay? So these are our 3 exiles. Again, this is a review. Daniel was taken in the first exile. Ezekiel was taken in the second exile. And Jeremiah was almost taken in the third exile, but then he wasn't, but he takes place in Chronicles, that third exile as well. And then if you'll remember, the temple was destroyed. That's why this last exile is so significant, because the temple and the walls were destroyed and the people were taken away. And so Solomon's temple was destroyed at this point. Okay? And then we're not going to look at it, but Daniel 5 tells about the end of the Babylonian Empire. Okay, after Babylon came what? Y'all should remember this. This is still review. Persian Empire, okay? So the Persian Empire, this is the one that is the bear raised up on one side with three ribs in its mouth. Okay, so the bear raised up on one side, the Persian Empire. Who remembers the leader of the Persian Empire that was the one that released the Jews to go back to Israel? Cyrus. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so Cyrus was the leader. Is it up there? Come on. Okay, so in 539, the Persians are defeated by the Babylonians. Okay? No, the Persians defeat the Babylonians, I'm sorry. Cyrus sends the Jews home, and then here's our three returns. Okay, so the first one was in 539, the second one 458, the third one 444. And if you remember, the first one was when they rebuilt the temple. They started in 539. It took about 20 years, so they didn't get done until about 518, 516, somewhere around there. And that was Zerubbabel built that temple. Okay? And so we've entered what's called the Second Temple period, when the Second Temple was built. The second return was when Ezra went and he rebuilt the people. He's the one that taught them the law. And if you'll remember, most of them didn't remember how to speak Hebrew at this time. And so it says that he explained the text to them. Most likely that means he translated. He literally would sit up and say, hey, this is the Hebrew word for this. You guys have forgotten Hebrew. And then the third one was when Nehemiah returns and he rebuilds the walls in Jerusalem from there. Okay? And so Cyrus was the leader of the Persian Empire. I think this is, at the very least, it's interesting. The image, remember we said it was a bear and it was risen up on one side, so one side of it was much stronger than the other. Okay, Cyrus, he was actually Median and he was Persian. When I say Median, I don't mean he was average. I mean that was, you've heard of the Medes, okay? That's a smaller empire. And so what happened was you have, when you hear Persian Empire, sometimes it's called the Persian Empire, sometimes it's called the Medo-Persian Empire. The reason it's called that is because it's actually two empires combined. Okay, and I'll give you a hint. One of them was much stronger than the other one. Okay, the Persian Empire was giant, enormous. The Medes were this kind of smaller empire, but Cyrus was both Median and Persian. Okay, and so that's why it's kind of comprised of these two empires. That's why one of them is much stronger than the other. And then you remember in Daniel's dream, what did the bear have in its mouth? 3 ribs. Okay, and so for the Persian Empire to gain power, it had to defeat 3 main enemies. And this is not in order. It defeated the Lydians, it defeated Egypt, and it defeated the Babylonians. Okay, so 3 ribs, 3 major empires. Now remember, do you need to memorize that stuff right there? No. But is it kind of important to understand why we're reading this? Yeah, okay. So some of y'all look stressed, some of y'all look worn out. Don't worry about all this, okay? If I fly over it, you just kind of fly with me. We'll go by at 10,000 feet and just wave with me as we go by, okay? There's some things we're going to get down and walk around, but we're still in the airplane, so to speak, okay? So now, after the Persian Empire, and remember, according to Daniel's dream, there's a third empire that comes along. It's going to be the Greek Empire. Okay. Now, the Greek Empire was known or became known because of Alexander the Great. Surely you've probably at least heard of his name. Okay. He was actually a really good military leader. He came to power. I think he was 19 years old. And look at this timeline. Oh, it says right there, 19 years old. Oh, I need to read these. Okay, so look at this timeline. 336, crowned king of Macedonia. 333, conquers Syria. Okay, that's 3 years later. I did that math in my head, by the way. 332, thank you. 332 conquers Egypt while going through Jerusalem. 331 conquers what empire? Persia. Okay. 323 dies in Babylon. Would you say he's a pretty quick conqueror? Right? In a matter of, oh gosh, what is that? 5-6 years, he has conquered. Here's a map. This is what he's taken over. You understand the extent of this, okay? A great military leader. I mean, incredible. And was able to push his men further than anyone could. So you understand why he was described as a leopard with 4 wings, right? I mean, swift, okay? And he went, the only reason they say that he stopped marching was because his generals and his troops finally said, hey, Alex, we've had enough, man. We can't go on anymore, okay? I think they marched somewhere around like 10 to 12,000 miles in these couple of years, okay? Because he just kept pushing, okay? And then he ends up dying in Babylon. He either dies of I've heard he died of, he drank too much, or I heard he died of a venereal disease or something like that. So either way, he went out like having a good time, okay? A young guy, sorry. Okay. All right, so you can see one of the first places he went. Okay, he goes through and he heads through little Israel right here. Okay, Israel's not a major player at this point, and so what he would do is he would come to the door and he'd knock on the door, and what would happen is he'd say, hey, if you would just declare me king, you guys will be fine, and I'll be on my way, and no one has to get hurt. And usually that went really well. What happened was when he came down through Jerusalem, supposedly as the story goes, he comes down, knocks on the door of Jerusalem, and they slam the door in his face, so to speak, right? And so he's very upset. And so what happens is, let's see here. Here's an artist drawing. Is that the high priest in Jerusalem comes out to meet him because Alexander says, I'm going to destroy this city. And here's a writing from Josephus. He says, when I was in Dium in Macedonia, considering how I could become master of Asia, I saw this very person in my sleep. This is Alexander describing when he saw the high priest. Dressed as he is now, he urged me not to delay, but to cross over confidently and take dominion over the Persians. And so you can see Alexander on his knees here. Supposedly what happened was Alexander had seen some sort of vision of this high priest. And when he comes out of Jerusalem, what the high priest does is he opens up the Bible, the Old Testament, and he opens up to the book of Daniel. And he says, hey, look in here. And he says, you read here what we just read. He says, this book of our sacred text says that you are going to come along and conquer the Persians. This is before he conquered Persia, right? And so Alexander says, hey, I like that. I like this guy. So he allowed Jerusalem to stay. And so I think that's pretty cool that he was able to use the Old Testament text to save the people of Israel at the time. Okay, so Alexander the Great, what he's known for was he was a missionary for Greek culture. Okay, he's known for Hellenism. The word for Greek is Hellas. Okay, so anytime you hear the word Hellenism, it means Greekism. Okay, or Hellenistic or Hellenized. All it means is they're Greek. That's it. Okay, so you'll remember in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, the first controversy in the new church comes between the distribution of food between Jews and the Hellenistic Jews. You remember reading that? I think it's Acts chapter 3, 4, somewhere around there, right? So when it says Hellenistic Jews, all it means are Greek, okay? So what he did, he was a missionary for Greek culture. He believed in the Greek culture. And he thought it had the best form of government. He thought it was wonderful. And so what he did was he ended up uniting the world in several ways, okay? He united the cities. He brought in Greek language, and he brought in Greek culture. So what he would do as he went into a city is he would bring in, remember, just like these other empires do, he would bring in these Greek artists and these Greek scientists and these Greek philosophers, okay? Alexander, growing up as a boy, his teacher was a guy by the name of Aristotle. You may have heard of him, okay? And so he's bringing all these things in, and so as he's leaving his Greek mark in all the cities, and he would build up certain parts of the cities to be very Greek. In the same way with the language, okay? If you wanted to speak to Alexander, what did you have to speak? Greek, okay? And again, he was spreading his culture everywhere. Same thing with the culture. He would try to spread the learning and the teachings of Aristotle. And so what began to happen was, and notice this, was the world was beginning to be united under this Greek culture. And so the results of Alexander the Great, remember at this time he takes over the entire known world. He Hellenizes practically everything. Now this is very important. He brought about for the first time cultural interchange from east to west. Okay? At this point when we say west, we mean Greece or Macedonia and to the left. Okay? And when we say eastern world, we mean Israel and to the right. And so what he did for the first time was he brought this interchange of Eastern versus Western thought, which are two very different things. We'll talk about that next week. And here's the lasting impact he had on the Jews. Number one was the diasporas, known as the dispersion of the Jews. Okay, it's very similar to in the New Testament when they tried to stamp out the church. What they did when they tried to do that was all the Christians would scatter, right? And then what happened? And then they create more churches and over here, okay? And so what happened was he was the one that helped spread out the Jews. He would take, when he went down to, remember he went through, let me put that map back up there. He went through Israel going down to Egypt on his way. And as he went along, he took some Jews with him. And he came down here and he ended up in Alexandria, Egypt. And he devoted like a fourth of the city to the Jews, okay? And so he said, hey, you guys go do your Jewish religious thing, but culturally, I want you guys to be very Greek, okay? Now think about this. When you think of Greece, what do you think of? Olympics, excellent example. When you think, what are the Olympics? What are we celebrating? Physical strength. We're celebrating man. Okay. What else do you think of when you think of Greek? Anything? Philosophy, right? I think if we sit here and name the top five, I think those two would definitely be top five. Okay. So philosophy. What does philosophy say? Where is truth? Right. And so you'll see what Greek culture is about. It's this idea. You'll notice it's not very religious. When you think of Greek, you don't really think of a lot of religious stuff, do you? You think of, we celebrate what? Mankind, his accomplishments. You think of the Olympics. When you think of Greek art, what do they paint? What do they sculpt? What is it? People. Like it's physical perfection, right? And so they have these sculptures of what they consider to be the perfect physical form. And so everything about Greek culture is celebrating man, right? Even the philosophy. Truth can be found where? In my head. I can sit around, we can reason and get around these things. And so I think that works out well for the Jews because you've got this religion, and that's the Jewish religion that's thousands of years old. And then you have this guy Alexander that comes through, who he's spreading his Greek culture. And what you'll notice is those don't really clash. Did you notice that? That it's kind of like he's saying, hey, we're gonna think the most of mankind. We're gonna spread this Greek culture. You guys over there worship your God. That's fine. I don't really care. And so it's kind of a great move for the Jews at the very least. Okay. And let me get back to these. Okay. So what happened? Impact on the Jews. The Jews were spread out, and so the Jews were able to move about more freely. What you'll see is the temple was replaced by synagogues. Now think about this, and this should be a clear-cut softball home run. How many temples were there? One. Where was it? Jerusalem. Okay, so you've got Jews that were starting to move around because Alexander has united the world. It's beginning to get more safe to move around. Do you see that? When the entire world begins to speak the same language, doesn't that encourage us to move around, right? When the entire world, now for the first time, I'm not even going to open my wallet because I don't have it, we have what? Common currency, right? So think about this. Before the world was united under any sort of Greek culture, if I wanted to travel 10 miles, 20 miles, is there such a thing as a dollar bill? No. So for me to survive, what do I have to do? I have to pack it. I'm going to be bartering is what I'm going to be doing. And so I have to carry what? A bunch of wheat or a bunch of goats or all this stuff, you know? And so think about how difficult it is to travel. Anyone ever traveled with a 4-month-old? Oh, it's like that. Like to go to the store, like the amount of stuff you have, and it's such a hassle, right? And so think about this, even as Greek culture spread, and just the impact of having a common currency led to what? Hey, we can start moving around easier, right? Because we can just take this thing called money, and it just fits in my pocket, and now I don't have to carry all this junk with me. And so it's encouraging the spreading of different peoples.